Also, we should flag that because of the big contraction in economic activity and the fiscal support that's being put in place, we now have public debt globally to be at the highest level in recorded history. So this is even higher than the post-World War II peak. And you can see that for advanced economies and for emerging market economies. This is now making it, this is a risk, especially for many emerging markets and low-income countries, as they have debt buildup. And this is risk both, the fiscal risk, but also the external risk that they face in terms of external financing needs. And so you can see there the number of, the fraction of countries that have high and medium risk of distress. Another concern with this crisis is the scarring that's come about from it, and it depends on what sectors you have in your economy. So for instance, the left graph, you see tourism, a country that's heavily dependent on tourism. You've seen a collapse in activity and really no recovery, while you've seen recovery in other sectors. So this becomes a major growth challenge for some countries that rely exclusively on tourism. The middle graph shows you that in the absence of policy support, SME bankruptcy rates could be very high, and especially in certain sectors that rely more on in-person contact. And so bankruptcy is a big risk. And a third major issue is that, unfortunately, this is a crisis that is projected to raise poverty rates around the world. It's going to, according to the World Bank, it's going to add about 70 million people into extreme poverty. And this is something that will have to be dealt with. I'm going to mention some positives, which is that there are, of course, opportunities that a crisis presents itself with, which is as countries are planning for recoveries and how to stimulate activity, a green recovery, of course, would be beneficial for countries and for the planet. And the right-hand side graph tells you that this is going to be a time of digital transformation around the world. You've seen this during the crisis, but this is going to be a sector that will require investment going forward, because there are still large gaps across countries in how well developed their digital infrastructure is. There's almost half of the world that still does not have access to the internet. And so these disparities will have to be reduced. On my next slides are the policy recommendations that we make. These depend upon whether you're a country where cases are rising and you're still in lockdown, or phase 2, when you're a country that's reopening, the cases are under control, and what kinds of measures should be taken. I'm not going to read through each one of them, but the basic idea is that in the first phase, when countries were in lockdown, it was important, of course, immediately to support people and firms to ensure that job matches were preserved. That is, that firms and workers stayed connected. To make sure there was enough liquidity in the system. Now, as the crisis elongates, and you have now the second phase where you're reopening, now there are going to be sectors that no longer are going to be viable because there's going to be much more persistent effect on them. Travel, for example, is one such sector. In that case, the support has to move away from kind of keeping workers attached to the travel sector, but actually supporting their reallocation away. You still would have to rely on making sure that there's income support for the vulnerable population through unemployment insurance. You're going to have to encourage hiring through hiring subsidies, especially targeted at young people and older workers who tend otherwise to be, stay out of the workforce for a very long time in a crisis. And so those measures will be needed. And then there will be some sectors that will have to go through bankruptcy. To improving your institutional framework to deal with this is going to be very important. And of course, it's important to seize opportunities for a green, more equal and digital friendly recovery. Now, to accomplish all of this, international coordination and support will be essential. It's essential on the health front, ensuring health supplies, health capacity in different countries. And also when there is a vaccine, that there's enough production and distribution of that, including for other kinds of medical treatments. It's important for the international community to help developing economies finance critical spending, including health. And in this case, this means that in some countries, this would be providing debt relief for countries. These are some of the instruments that we're using at the IMF. We've given emergency financing to over 70 countries. We have debt relief that's being provided to over 25 economies, I believe 28. And international liquidity needs are also very important that the international community makes sure that there is sufficient international liquidity in the system so that emerging markets can have access to financing at reasonable rates. And of course, it's important to make sure that that there is cooperation on the trade and technology front, and that disagreements can be resolved through a multilateral rules-based trading system, which also requires work. I mean, you have to also improve how that system works.